In 105 BC, Rome was one of the most powerful states in the Mediterranean. Yet despite its military strength, the Republic faced a growing threat from migrating Germanic peoples, including the Cimbri, Teutones, and Ambrones. For years, Roman armies had struggled to stop their advance. The northern migration had already inflicted a series of humiliating defeats on Rome. In 113 BC, the Cimbri defeated the Roman army commanded by Gnaeus Mallius Caepio at Norea. Then, in 109 BC, the consul Marcus Junius Silanus suffered another defeat. 2 years later, in 107 BC, Lucius Cassius Longinus was killed while fighting the Tigurini, forcing the surviving Roman troops to accept a humiliating settlement. By 105 BC, Rome was determined to put an end to the threat. A massive Roman army was assembled in southern Gaul, near the Rhône River, to confront the migrating tribes. 2 senior commanders led the Roman forces: Gnaeus Mallius Maximus, the serving consul, and Quintus Servilius Caepio, a powerful aristocrat from one of Rome's oldest and most prestigious families. But the Roman command was deeply divided. Caepio looked down on Mallius because of his comparatively modest aristocratic background, and the two commanders quickly became embroiled in a bitter political rivalry. Instead of working together, they operated largely as separate commands, undermining the effectiveness of the Roman army. This division created a dangerous weakness that the Cimbri and their Germanic allies could exploit. Their exact numbers, like those of the Roman army, are uncertain, and ancient sources likely exaggerated them. However, both forces were massive in scale. Estimates put the tribes at nearly 200,000 able-bodied troops, while the Romans fielded around 120,000 men between the two armies. Quintus Servilius Caepio's relationship with Mallius only worsened as the enemy approached. Although the exact sequence of events is disputed, the key problem was clear. The Roman armies remained separated, with Caepio unwilling to fully cooperate with Mallius, whom he considered socially inferior. With the full might of the Germanic tribal army bearing down on the Roman position, Quintus Servilius Caepio saw an opportunity to act. Rather than coordinate closely with Mallius, he appears to have taken matters into his own hands, advancing with his army in an attempt to secure a victory, and the glory that would come with it. Whatever his motivation, the decision was extremely dangerous. Caepio's legions advanced toward the enemy position, preparing to give battle. But the Cimbri and their allies were not caught unprepared. They were ready, and eager for a fight. Tens of thousands of tribal warriors poured from their camp and formed up across the battlefield, preparing to meet the Roman advance. Opposite them, the Roman soldiers moved forward in disciplined formations. Thousands of legionaries marched steadily across the field, their ranks organized, shields locked, and weapons ready. Less experienced troops were positioned toward the front, while more seasoned soldiers formed the center and rear of the Roman force. The two sides had already clashed in previous encounters, and both understood the danger posed by their enemy. Now, with the armies closing in and the battlefield filling with soldiers, neither side was willing to back down. At long last, the two forces closed the distance. The great battle had begun. The silence of the battlefield was shattered as the Roman legions and Germanic warriors crashed into one another. The ensuing fight was nothing short of a bloodbath. Once the lines collided, Roman legionaries began stabbing and hacking at the more lightly armored Germanic warriors. According to some ancient accounts, the Germanic fighters cared little for their own safety, throwing themselves into the fighting with an almost insatiable bloodlust. The initial clash was relatively even, with the Romans arguably gaining the advantage through their superior discipline and cohesion. But as the moments turned into minutes, more and more Germanic warriors continued to enter the battle, steadily shifting the balance of power in their favor. In a head-on engagement, the Roman legions were notoriously versatile and difficult to defeat. But the Germanic tribes had faced Roman armies before. They understood how the legions fought, and now they possessed an overwhelming numerical advantage, particularly in cavalry. Worse still, Caepio had entered the battle with only part of the Roman army, leaving Mallius and the rest of the Roman forces separated from the fighting. Those advantages quickly began to overwhelm the Romans. Before long, almost the entire Germanic army had entered the battle. The sheer weight of their numbers began to push the Roman formations backward, forcing the legionaries to give ground. Caepio's gamble had backfired. With his troops now on the defensive, he had few options left. The famed Germanic leaders of the Cimbri and Teutones, Boiorix and Teutobod, were not about to let their advantage slip away. Each commander, directing the right and left wings of the combined tribal force, urged his warriors forward and pressed the Roman lines relentlessly. Caepio's formations began to buckle, particularly on the wings, where his cavalry was severely outnumbered. The fighting continued for a time, but eventually the Roman horsemen could endure no longer. The first major Roman formation to break was the cavalry. Heavily outnumbered, the Roman riders were driven back from the field. With their cavalry support collapsing, the Roman infantry became increasingly exposed. Eventually, the cavalry routed completely. The Roman legions were forced back as well, retreating toward their fortified camps. There, Caepio's army split into two desperate defensive positions. On the left, Roman troops managed to regroup outside the camp and mounted a desperate defense, attempting to hold their ground against the advancing Germanic warriors. On the right, however, the situation was far worse. Caepio's troops were driven all the way back into the camp, where they used the fortifications as a final line of defense. The Germanic forces continued to press forward, exploiting every weakness in the Roman position. By this stage, Gnaeus Mallius Maximus had witnessed the unfolding disaster. Realizing that Caepio's army was in serious trouble, Mallius hurried to form his own troops for battle. His soldiers prepared to advance, but the situation was chaotic, and there was little time to organize a coordinated response. The Roman army was now being drawn into the catastrophe one half at a time. Mallius's intervention may have prevented the immediate and complete annihilation of Caepio's forces. But by this stage, Caepio's actions had already sealed the fate of the Roman army. Boiorix and Teutobod seized the opportunity created by the divided Roman command. Using their overwhelming numerical superiority, the Germanic forces began to envelop the Roman positions, surrounding the two Roman armies and cutting them off from one another. The Romans were now fighting from a position of increasing desperation. What had begun as a dangerous gamble by Caepio had developed into a full-scale disaster. The two Roman armies were isolated, surrounded, and being crushed under the weight of the Germanic assault. Roman armies were built around discipline, organization, and cohesion. When a Roman army became surrounded, separated, or its formations began to break apart, that organization could collapse with terrifying speed. At Arausio, this is precisely what appears to have happened. Both Mallius's and Caepio's forces were ultimately pushed back toward the Rhône, while other Roman troops attempted to hold their fortified positions. Boiorix and Teutobod continued to press the attack, using their superior numbers to envelop the Roman positions and drive the surviving soldiers into increasingly desperate defensive positions. Whatever chance remained of the two Roman armies cooperating had now disappeared. This was no longer simply a battle. For the Romans, it had become a fight for survival. As the Roman formations collapsed, survivors desperately attempted to escape across the Rhône or flee into the surrounding countryside. Others sought refuge within the fortified camps, hoping the defenses would provide protection from the Germanic assault. Many Romans attempting to cross the river were reportedly drowned, weighed down by their armor and equipment. The battle had descended into slaughter. Historians' accounts claimed that 80,000 Roman soldiers were killed, along with another 40,000 camp followers and servants. These figures are almost certainly exaggerated, and the true Roman losses cannot be established with confidence. But the precise number is almost beside the point. The scale of the disaster was enormous. A massive Roman army had been shattered in a single campaign. Weapons, shields, standards, and equipment were abandoned across the battlefield, as the victorious Germanic warriors seized enormous quantities of Roman spoils. For the Cimbri, Teutones, and their allies, it was an extraordinary victory. For Rome, it was a catastrophe of historic proportions. Arausio had not simply been a defeat, it had been one of the greatest military disasters in Roman history, equaling that of their famous defeat at Cannae over 100 years prior.